What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. As a matter of fact, he used to tell me, now this dude just turned 90. He used to tell me that he would go on the internet at night into chat rooms and he would arrange to meet a guy at like 2:30 in the morning at a rest stop on a highway near him. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And he showed me this photo of this really well-built guy that's probably 30 years old at the most. And he's like, and this is the photo that I sent. And I'm like, you meet these guys that you've not corresponded with or met before, and you're meeting them at a rest stop in the middle of the night after sending them this photo, and that's what they're expecting. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, what happens? And he's like, well, most of the time they're pretty angry and they just kind of storm off. But once in a great while, somebody's just drunk enough or high enough or desperate enough, and you know, we do stuff and it's worth it. And I'm like, how often does that happen? And he's like, oh, like maybe 1 out of every 25 or 30. And I'm like, 25 or 30? How many times have you done this? And he's like, well, pretty much like every other weekend. I'll do it on like a late Saturday night and I'll meet up with a guy. And I'm like, dude, you're going to be killed. I mean, do you understand what you're doing? We didn't have the word catfish back then for it, but I said, you know, you are representing yourself to be young and well-built and hot, and you're meeting these guys that you find well-built and hot, and you think after, especially if they've been drinking, that they're going to react well to a 90-year-old that shows up and goes, oh, by the way, yeah, I sent you the wrong picture. I'm actually this. And I'm like, please, don't do that anymore. Please, do not do that anymore. I have a little story for you today that I think you might find amusing, and it's about the oldest personal training client that I ever had. This man had just turned 90. Now, I used to run ads in newspapers, the gay newspapers here in Boston, and he found me through that paper. And he lived up on the North Shore of Massachusetts in one of those very, very, very wealthy towns. And he would drive himself into Boston to one of the gyms that I was working at. Sometimes he would drive, most of the time, and then he also had a car service at his beck and call, because again, so I started training him at the gyms, and he would come in a couple times a week, and we would just do very light stuff. He was the kind of client that wanted mostly to talk, and most of his conversation was very sexual. He was married to a woman. He said it was just a convenience. They had been married for like 40 or 50 years, but in the house they have separate bedrooms and they don't do anything physical. And so he used to be very suggestive with me. He told me he had to make a trip to New York, and he invited me to go down with him to stay at this exclusive club that he belongs to. And he said we'd go down, he had a little bit of business to do, but we could really relax and have a nice time. He'd cover the expense for me to get to New York with him. He would completely pay for the club we were staying at. And they were like the top rated restaurants there. So he was saying to me, you know, one of the things I'd really like you to do as a trainer is I'd really like you to give me some massages. And I had told him, yes, I had done some of that in the past, but I wasn't doing it regularly anymore. And I said, actually, I don't even have a massage table, although I did have a massage table. And so he said when we got to New York, we'd stay in the same bed and I could give him a full naked massage on the bed. And I completely turned him down and said, I'm sorry, in my schedule, I can't go to New York. I'm sorry, da da da. So that was fine. We continued at the gym. So then we did a couple more sessions, and then he invited me up to North Shore to have lunch with him and his wife. And he said, but when we go up there, don't worry, because we'll eat with my wife and she's going to cook for us, but we'll get to spend a lot of personal time, just me and you, and I want to show you a bunch of stuff. Okay, sure, why not? I knew going up there would appease him a little bit, and maybe we could then just continue training without a problem. So I drive up there, and he lives in this big, huge house. And he starts by saying, before we go in and meet my wife and stuff, he said, let's take a little walk. I'd like to show you my family's estate. So I said, okay, sounds great. And we walked down his street and up to another street. And then there was this massive double gate and this huge long driveway, huge lawn, and this mansion beyond belief. So he said that his family still owns it. He has some relatives that are staying in there right now, but let's go up and walk around the outside of the house so you can see it. So I said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. It's amazing. So we go up the driveway up to this house, and we walk around, and you could see a beautiful lawn that sloped down to the big rocks with the ocean crashing against it. It was like the movie Rebecca. I don't know if you've ever seen the old movie Rebecca, where she goes to her husband's estate. And honest to God, that is what I thought when I saw this house and the gate and the driveway and the whole deal. So we walked around there. I was very impressed. Then we went back and we met his wife, and she cooked lunch for us. So we finished lunch and she goes off, and he said, okay, now I want to drive you to some places up here that I think you should see. Okay, sounds good. Let's go. So he takes me in this beautiful big money car. I don't know cars, so I don't really know what it was, but it was big. It was beautiful. It looked really expensive. And then he's like, okay, there's a couple spots that I want to show you where this guy's cruising, and I think you're going to find it really fun. All right, well, I'm up here. I'm in your car. You're driving. Okay, let's go. So we go to this first place, and we get out of the car and we start walking, and it's, you know, kind of a marshy, along the river, reeds kind of thing. The kind of places where a lot of guys would hook up. And we're walking on this road and we don't see anybody at all. And we turn around and he's like, okay, I'm going to take you to this other place because this doesn't seem to work out well. So we're walking back towards the car, and suddenly there is a guy that emerges from the trees, and he stands there, and I want to make sure that in the future this video can be monetized, so I'm going to use language very carefully. There was a gentleman who did not have his lower half clothing on, and he was entertaining us and looking at us and trying to get me, not my 90-year-old client, but trying to get me to get involved in this. And my client says to me, oh, go ahead, it'll be fun, I'll just watch. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, no, that ain't happening. So he's like, well, you just didn't like this particular guy, so let's go to this other place. So he gets in the car and he drives me to this other place where there's just like a dirt side of the road, but enough that cars could park there. And there was like 3 cars parked. And he said, okay, the place that's really good that I want you to see, and the guys are amazing, we have to hike up to this spot. And I'm like, okay. I was starting to think a little bit concerned because my client's 90, right? And I had to train him very carefully because he was 90. And now here he wants to take me, you know, up a light hill or something to where this spot is. So I was a little concerned about that, but he said he goes there all the time. So, okay. And he leads me, and it's not a gentle slope up. It's so straight up. I mean, it isn't completely straight up, but it was pretty close. And there was a path, but there were trees, you know, all along. There were big rocks. And he goes in front of me, and he has to put himself down and use his hands to pull himself up, and then his feet. And it was so steep, actually, that me behind him had to do the same thing. I could not do it in a standing position. I had to get down on all 4s and crawl. And I was really nervous about the client. But he kept saying, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, we're almost there. And like a couple minutes passes, we're like pulling ourselves up. And then we get up to the top of it, and we start walking around, and there are these big boulders. And in between the boulders are other gentlemen who basically did not have any clothing on at all. They were engaged in numerous activities, and blatantly there, didn't care that we were there watching. One of them nodded to my client, so it's like, okay, well, I guess this is something he does all the time. And he said, oh, go ahead. And I'm like, dude, I'm not into doing this with a client. This is not the kind of thing that I'm comfortable with. You know, I'd rather pass on that. It's interesting, it's nice to see, but, you know, I don't want to take part in it. So he's like, all right, fine. And we kind of slide on our asses back down, and we get in his car and we drive back to his house. And he said, well, it was a great afternoon. Thanks for coming for lunch. And I said, oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great to drive up here and see this beautiful area. And I'll see you at the gym on Monday. And he's like, no, you won't. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, I think we're done for now. And I'm like, okay, well, it was great working with you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. And I started driving back, and I'm like, that is exactly what he wanted. The whole training thing, and this has happened with a few people, but the whole training thing was really just trying to talk to me dirty and then getting me to take my clothes off and do something with him. And that was not going to happen. If you like that, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, give me a thumbs up, please. It really helps. And I will see you with another video coming up. Thanks so much, guys. Bye for now.